Hello and welcome to the Crowbar. It's episode 112, it's the 29th of September. I'm Graham Smith, and I'm joined by three lovely people. One of them is...
Marsh Davis.
Another of them is...
Chris Thurston.
And the third of them is...
Philippa Warr.
Special guest Philippa Warr.
Hello.
I don't think she gets to call herself special guest Philippa Warr. That would be a bit of a... That'd be a bit weird. You turn up at somebody else's podcast
it back.
and say, I am a special guest.
Surely that's the only time you do get to be a special guest. Otherwise you're just like a podcaster.
Yeah, all right.
A regular substitute guest, Philippa Warr.
Terrible Tom Senior impresario. Philippa Warr. I don't know. Oh.
Well,
how special do you feel right now?
Really, really. I feel victimised. Is that special?
That's
pretty
Martin's
special.
version of special. That's how he lets you know he cares. From outside your bedroom window.
oh God. On to the news. What's been happening?
There's really no easy way to segue from there to... Well, from victimisation to Wildstar going free to play. How is Jeremy Gaffney feeling right now? Who is the founder of Carbine Studios. That's a weirdly specific reference that probably our listeners wouldn't get.
Good segue.
Yeah.
Reversed over Jeremy Gaffney's corpse on a segue there.
That was an MMO.
It
Was
was.
there a question?
Well,
Introducing it as a topic.
I haven't played Wildstar. You guys have, presumably, haven't you?
I really liked it. Then my subscription ran out because I stopped reviewing it because I've reviewed it. And then I didn't renew it because Dota was taking up all of my free time. So it felt like a bit of a folly in terms of money. So this is good. Good for me.
Oppositely, I accidentally paid for it consistently for 14 months or so.
How many times did you play it in that time?
Well, almost none. After the first couple of weeks.
Terrible return on your investment.
It was an awful investment. I think I've done my bit to prevent that game from going free to play any earlier than it did.
Do you think it was your fault? Like, I would have been able to go back and play the game free of charge back in January if you hadn't been there, like, pumping money
propping up
into
the studio. I did a lot of writing about it when it came out, and I, paid for a few months in advance, and just forgot to cancel it. And every month I'd get something saying, like, we've renewed your Wildstar subscription. I'd be like, huh. And then I would do nothing else with that information for another month, consistently for...
Would you like to sign up to my subscription scheme?
Because you used the word...
You can cancel it at any time.
The word scheme is what... That's what
Sign up to the Creating Crowbar Patreon.
Yeah, indeed, it's a folly that I myself live off. So,
But what was the game's hook? It's kind of disappeared out of my memory now. I know it's kind of chirpy-looking sci-fi thing, but
Cartoony sci-fi western MMO that was attempting to do all of the things that WoW did after 7 years of release, and do it in a way that made overt the different ways in which people played MMOs. So if you were the type of MMO player that was just concerned with lore, there was like an archaeologist class or something like that, where you
explorer, I think, or scientist.
Yeah, going around finding bits of story in the environment and that kind of thing. If you were the kind of guy that liked power leveling, if you liked raiding, etc., there was a kind of career path for you that would attempt to filter out some of the other stuff that you didn't enjoy so much and just give you the experience that you wanted, which was a neat idea.
I was whatever the class was that went around sort of, I think it was a scientist, but it was, it was very much about exploring the world and finding out more about it and sort of having that sort of natural history kind of bent.
the other thing, so it was very much sort of aimed at people who loved World of Warcraft at launch and kind of missed that structure of things, but modernized in a whole bunch of ways. But the main thing about it for me is it had great combat, had probably one of the best hotbar MMO combat systems I've seen, in that every single ability, there were no, as far as I remember, there are no auto attacks in Wildstar, like no just sort of regular hit man with sword, fire gun at man stuff. Everything is an ability on very short cooldowns, and everything is an AoE in like a big different shape, and that applies to enemies in the world as well. So everything that comes at you in like a cone or a straight line or a circle or something, so everything can be dodged. And it's very mobile and fast compared to almost any other game of that type apart from Guild Wars 2, which is probably the only other one to come close to that.
And how are they proposing the free-to-play aspect of it?
No idea. I think you accidentally pay for it for 14 months.
I think, if I remember rightly from a preview of it that we had on RPS a little while ago, that it was something like it was going free to play, but then there was like extra stuff that you could pay for. Like there was a premium tier of stuff, but I can't remember what that actually. I think it meant things like you could start your own guilds rather than just join them. It was that kind of level of stuff.
Yeah, it's still got the old subscription model in there, basically, because they don't want everyone to suddenly stop subscribing overnight. So if you forgot,
I wonder even how you do that.
And they've added more cosmetic items and stuff like that. So as well as gaining XP now while you're fighting enemies, you also gain a new in-game currency, which lets you get all the new stuff they've added for free if you kind of grind out that currency, or you can just pay money to get that currency, in which case you can buy your hats and your other things.
It used to be that you could earn money and spend it on cred, kind of like a Plex system.
Yeah, they did have a Plex system. Like, so you could spend, you could pay for your subscription with in-game money under the old system. So they might have just sort of switched that around.
They've also apparently redesigned big chunks of it. So like the crafting system is apparently changed. The combat stat system is changed because the stats were quite complicated before. They've apparently completely redesigned the introduction to the game. So your tutorials and your character creators and stuff are all different.
Okay.
They're obviously expecting new interest in the game and trying to create a better new user experience. But I have no idea if they've succeeded because I haven't played it.
It's weird. I think I would have stuck with it, but everybody else I knew who was playing it for review, and so when they all disappeared, like there was no one left to play with, and so that sort of disrupted the enjoyment of it to the point that I didn't sort of prioritise it over the other stuff where my friends still were. So the MOBAs that I play and, you know, all of that kind of stuff just sort of stayed on rotation, and Wildstar kind of dipped because, yeah, my friends weren't there anymore.
I can't...
Except Chris, apparently.
I can't remember what came out about 3 weeks after it, because I really liked it, like, and probably would go back to it. Like, it did definitely have that kind of early WoW feel to it. It was the first time I'd really enjoyed an MMO since Guild Wars 2.
Yeah, something came out, didn't it?
Something came out and took away that early adoption wave, and I can't remember off the top of my head.
I think it came out like May or June.
Was it
June
Titanfall?
2014? So
No.
it might have been Titanfall, because that would have come out August 2014, wasn't it?
I thought that was about March 2014.
Can't remember.
We don't know.
In other words,
Don't know.
don't know. But yeah, something definitely swept in and took all the people away, and that was that for me.
Apparently they had problems with post-release content updates and stuff
Right.
as well. They
I saw
apparently
some
promised
of that. I
to have like monthly updates that then never came.
And also, like they had to cancel either Christmas or Halloween one year because, or
both.
you know, that thing because, yeah, they couldn't get like the patches worked out properly, and they wanted to sort of have a bit more polish, but that would mean obviously, yeah, cancelling Christmas and so on. It's kind of like the Oliver Cromwell approach to patching.
Oliver Cromwell?
Didn't he cancel Christmas?
Did he?
But as the Lord Protector of England.
It's not a reference I'm familiar with, but maybe. That sounds like the kind of dickish thing you would do.
Cromwell was
Civil
the
War
one
happened.
who died and was buried and then was dug up and hung, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I like him, he's cool.
It's a real war on Christmas.
So sure he cancelled Christmas.
He made war in Ireland? Similar.
If it turns out I'm right.
I'm not denying it. It may well be one of those weird historical facts.
If you know whether or not Oliver Cromwell cancelled Christmas,
Text in.
write in.
Cancelling Christmas is maybe the kind of thing that developers Carbine do generally. Like, there's that website, I think it's glassdoor.com, where people post reviews of the company that they work for, and I think Carbine have some of the worst reviews of any game developer I've ever seen. Yeah, people were really unhappy with management and stuff like that.
Huh.
I mean, pretty quickly after the game came out, they had redundancies, and they had been working on it for over 7 years before it was released, which I imagine is quite a demoralising time to work on a game, a single project.
MMOs, though. I mean, because there's just the number of staff you need to have upkeep is vastly fewer than the number of stuff you need to make the game in the first place. So it's, well, a lot of the studios that make MMOs go through that same contraction immediately after launch. I think most studios go through a contraction after launch, but
Yeah.
I think ZeniMax did the same thing. ZeniMax Online Studios for Elder Scrolls Online had a big, lost a lot of people after that game came out. Wildstar's a lot better though.
Does it feel like the end of the subscription-based MMO? Is that
we've been saying this
thing now?
feels like a decade.
Because this was kind of the last one.
Past.
This was kind of the last one, though. Like, it was the
Yeah,
one that was
I mean,
supposed
I
to-
remember, June 2014, whenever it was, saying, this is probably the last one. And there hasn't really been one since. Has there?
Probably, but not a good one that we care about or can remember the name of.
No. So, hopefully, yes.
Well, that's dead. Marsh, what have you been playing?
I've been playing Hardland, Graham, which is a badly named game.
Is it easy or difficult?
It's perfectly easy,
Oh.
but you do need to save quite often.
Perfectly easy, but you have to save quite a lot of land.
And you die quite a lot. But there's
Colon, and you die quite a lot.
yeah,
Land.
If you
Land.
delay it a lot, does that not make it hard?
not really. Because it's hard to know really what your objectives are in it, so you can't really feel frustrated at not failing at them, or failing at the things that you don't know that you're doing.
Hard to know what your objectives are, land.
There you go. It's an RPG. But part of it's like procedurally generated. You have these kind of town hubs. It feels sort of Zelda-y. Shut up. In that it's got this gorgeous art style, which feels like a claymation, stop-motion cartoon from Eastern Europe in the 80s. Everything's got this kind of lovely sculpted, kind of soft feel to it. And the kind
The
of
opposite
characters,
of hard.
exactly. They have really big heads. You carry on doing that.
No.
Okay. They got
I
big
can
heads.
if you need.
No.
If you need someone
No,
to
no.
step in.
Kind of these large, winsome eyes. They have, and they all have these kind of like very fixed kind of expressions, which lends them a kind of comedy to everything they do. You can kind of pick up most things in the game. So you walk across the bridge, you just pick up a fisher lady, and you just hold her right above your head, and you'll both be just standing there with completely impassive faces with these giant eyes. If somehow that is it's extremely funny to see, and then you can throw her in the river, and nothing really happens. But it's a really kind of reactive game. There's lots of systems in it. AI mobs kind of traipse through the woodland and the procedural wilderness that intersperses the towns. And they attack each other. Each of them are, led by goblin commanders who have their own particular names and weapons and things like that. And I'm not quite sure what the point of the game is yet. You wake up an amnesiac, as you do in so many of these games, and you kind of get given a fetch quest to go and fetch a fishing rod from the local village. But you can immediately kind of just ignore that. And that doesn't seem to lead to any kind of quest or consequence either. So you can just kind of piss off into the wilderness, and I immediately went through this portal which had a tooltip saying "what the fuck" over it. Ended up in by this giant apple tree, as in the apples on the tree are giant. They're like bigger than a human. And I fell off and landed among some chickens which were praying at an altar, and picked up a chicken hat. Apparently the chicken hat can allow you to command chickens, as all the hats can do in the game. It also passes you off as a chicken, to all intents and purposes, to the rest of the AI.
So
you
it's
can...
like the masks in Majora's Mask.
Yes, yeah, although I don't think it has quite the same mechanical variety as the masks in Majora's Mask. They seem to really change the way that people interact with you in more kind of sophisticated ways. This seems just to be a way of making you appear as that creature to the other AI. So, for some reason, guardsmen and the mayor of the village really hate chickens, as I put on a chicken hat, and they all attacked me, and had to kill a whole bunch of them. Had to kill Terence the Animal Lover, which was his very inaccurate but randomly generated name. And I could kind of milled around, did lots of stuff, fed some ham to a skeleton. That's a quest you can do. That's pretty good. Got a pig hat. The pig hat allows you to go through goblin country pretty much unmolested. The goblins all...
that joke makes itself.
Goblins, I think, the most kind of interesting plot strand that seems to be offering itself to you, in as much as there's any kind of coherent journey that you're being pulled along, is that the Goblin King is getting really fat, and at some point he's going to burst, and all the other goblins are going to eat him, and thereby elect a new goblin leader. But I don't know, because I can't find the Goblin King. I'm not quite sure where I'd find him, and the game stopped working.
Probably quite easy to find if he's that big.
What a great source of government succession. The old king bursts and everyone eats him, and whoever eats the most of him is now therefore the largest and therefore the new leader. I would like this political system.
Who was the king that was really, really fat? King Henry VIII.
Yeah.
You could have eaten him except for the leg. The really gross leg. A suppurating wound.
Yeah.
I think he did have leg wounds, didn't he? Leg problems. Anyway,
What is this? Doubt Pip's historical accuracy hour.
I thought you were just randomly picking some kind of horrible illness that you would have likely had.
He had like an injury, didn't he, in his leg? Like a long-running kind of awful, suppurating, disgusting thing that needed dressing every now and again.
Didn't he cancel the Pope?
I think he cancelled all of our mailing from the Pope.
He'd had enough of that papal bull.
Oh!
Tudor bants. Sorry, Marty, you were telling us a story.
I've pretty much finished, really. It's extremely charming, this game, and chaotic and weirdly emergent in ways that I wouldn't naturally expect from an RPG. Especially one which looks like it's following, just in the way of having a cutesy art style, looks like it's following in the kind of Zelda footsteps, but clearly goes off at weird, emergent, procedurally generated angles after that. I don't know exactly what state the game's ever going to get to, because it's in early access at the moment. And it seems to be a very small team. I think at most 5 people, maybe even 4 people who are making it in one of the Nordic countries, I forget which. And they're very responsive to feedback and stuff, but there is only 4 of them, and they're making what appears to be a huge game, or could be huge. I've seen GIFs of armies of goblins, which I assume you can command by wearing the goblin mask, attacking what appears to be some kind of giant anthropomorphized elephant monster. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to see that for myself because the game did stop working overnight, and although they acknowledged my feedback and found the bug, they can't issue a fix until this week. So, I mean, as to whether you should play it or not, I would suggest that whether your tolerance for week-long spans where you aren't able to access the game or not, decide yourself whether you can suffer that. It's the nature of early access, isn't it?
Chris!
What?
What have you been playing?
I've been, Pip and I, Pip had already played it just last night, finished getting me up to speed on Life is Strange, which is good in many ways. I don't know if we've spoken about it on the pod before. I know you, yeah, nodding vigorously, which is good. And on an unrelated note, Marty and I played the first half pretty much of Until Dawn, which is a PlayStation-bound horror choose-your-own-adventure game. Is there a name for that genre that The Walking Dead was kind of in, that Life is Strange is in?
Telltale Games.
Well, they're a bit like, whatever it is Telltale make now, because they're not RPGs, they're not really adventure games.
Moral pachinko sets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sort of spider diagrams. Moral spider diagrams.
Yeah, flowcharts.
Yeah. Emotional flowchart simulators. Because I've sort of, I think getting towards the end, I'm not going to spoil anything for Life is Strange, by the way, just to talk about some general things about it. When we played, I was quite excited to play Until Dawn. I won't dwell on it too much, apart from to say that I think it's total shit.
Yeah.
I think it's totally, incredibly poorly designed and quite unenjoyable in many ways. I don't really, it's attracted a weird cult following, which is fine, people who like it, but I think it's dreadful. So
does that mean you're not going to play the rest of it with me?
No, we'll play the rest of it because we're committed now, but it's... But
fun evenings with Chris and Marsh.
But Life is Strange does a whole bunch of things much, much, much better than even things are on the same theme in terms, both of them have like a butterfly effect theme, because that's the only theme you can have when your game is a flowchart.
Yes.
Because it's, the self-aggrandizing theme, which is, what if a small thing could affect a big thing? What if your seemingly meaningless decisions weren't meaningless? What if?
What is it? What does one of the characters in Until Dawn say? I think he even says, like, after witnessing something, like, it was
Butterfly effect, motherfucker.
It wasn't motherfucker. It's more like Bosh or something like that.
Butterfly effect.
Bosh.
As something completely unrelated happens because of something completely else. Yeah. Life is Strange. The thing I really like about it, actually, in that genre, which is so much about having that feeling that your decisions don't really mean anything, almost addresses that with its time travel mechanic that you can rewind at any time to try multiple branches of the same decision. It takes what would be quick saving and quick loading in every other game of that type, and rather than prevent you from doing it, makes it a game mechanic when it's working really well. And that's really clever because it actually acknowledges something about how those games are actually played. It makes a design decision in order to address the fact that those games are actually a bit bullshit almost all the time because they don't adhere to any kind of rules. Because they don't adhere to systems at all. So in all of these games, there are like two different types of... There's like weird emotions you can feel because of the types of consequences you've got for your decisions. Because you're always at the mercy of the game designer. So in Life is Strange, definitely, and to a lesser extent, something like The Walking Dead, there's a particular type of relief when you realise that a decision you made earlier that seemed like it might be significant only acts as a minor debuff on a future conversation, as opposed to seriously altering the outcome of something. Because you know, after you've made a decision, you walk around with the, what's going to happen because I did that? And arbitrarily, it will either be awful and get somebody killed, or it'll be fine as long as you don't pick the wrong thing in the next conversation. And they're all this, they're essentially games about gaming these conversational systems that hope that you will invest so much in the characters and the dialogue and the plot that you won't notice that nothing you do actually means anything. And I think, you know, I do think in his latter episodes, Life is Strange falls down that hole quite dramatically.
Yeah.
And it has its final episode to come to basically pull itself back out because its early episodes are brilliant. And actually do sort of let you play with the systems a little bit and sort of acknowledge some things, and then it feels like they just run out of ways of making that interesting. You know, but like, and
part of that, I think, is because you didn't balls things up to the extent that I did at various points.
Yeah, well, like, we played
because I was telling Marsh that, like, one of the bits I'd thought that, you know, I was just settling in, because I thought, oh, we'll be here for half an hour at least, you know, feeling quite smug about it, and then it turned out you just picked all of the right options, or, you know, all of the ones that I would like to have picked for my playthrough to feel like it was actually making sense, but I just settled for the least botched attempt.
Yeah, fine. I had a quick chat. Well, that's the thing, is we got through all the way through episode 4, and I didn't use the time travel power ever.
No, you used it once, but that was kind of like a minor thing.
Oh, it's for one minor thing and one mandatory puzzle where you have to push blocks around and you have to use it in order to progress, right?
Do you like not to use it because then that feels like you're having the canonical playthrough, or
it's actually more that it doesn't put the pressure on you in the right way as it does previously, because earlier it actually feels like it's a necessity to like gauge people's reactions because it's a bit more ambiguous what the correct decision's going to be. So being able to cheat with your time power feels like a superpower in that case, because, you know, oh man, this conversation feels really you know, ambiguous. Maybe I need to tease this out in a few different directions before I commit to something. Whereas as it goes on, I think the desire to create drama and the desire to raise the stakes of the story result in decisions that, at least as far as I was concerned, only really had one correct answer, and anything else, and the game actually struggled to find reasons for you to go back and see the other ones, because it's like, well, that seems, you know, this one seems pretty shit, actually, unless you pick the one obviously moral thing you can do in this scenario or whatever.
I think more than any of the others, 4 hinges on 5 to redeem it or make sense of it or to contextualise it, which is why, because I was writing down my thoughts about it today, and it's like there's so much that I was like, I'm not comfy with this, or I'm on the fence about that, and it needs 5 to do good things to make 4 work.
Yeah, particularly to justify one particular thing about 3 and 4. That it has no justification at present unless they kind of go back to it. But that's going to be annoying to listen to, because talking about plot points we can't really spoil. But my question, I guess, is it felt like this genre of game, whatever you call it, felt very, very novel and fresh with The Walking Dead, like sort of point-and-click adventures had sort of made the case for their relevance again and come along and done something much more emotionally impactful.
Mask-alikes,
yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, and actually the reason Mask works, is because it is so sufficiently complicated that you feel like you can dig through it in loads of different ways.
And it's rapid as well, and kind of throwaway in a way. Like you don't feel any kind of emotional attachment to any one particular tree. You just want to see what everything does. You know?
I think I spent a week just going back to it at odd intervals to play through it again and go, oh, okay, that's what this one does. So.
Whereas now I wonder if, like, I definitely anticipate people are going to really like Life is Strange. And I know people have written a lot about how much they like Until Dawn, which I just don't get. But like, for me, it feels like, man, this is like this genre, this little subgenre that's like flared up for a couple of years, particularly Telltale's entire output based on this formula, really feels like it's straining at what it can possibly achieve now. Yeah. And that was a bit of a surprise, because actually I thought Life is Strange, for me, when we started, it felt like the first time in a while someone had come on and said, actually, we're gonna change how you approach this, and, you know, bring something from outside the game into the game and make the story about that. And then they fucked that up a bit, and they orbit around, and now it feels a bit more like the others. And it's just a question of, like, is there still satisfaction to be had in steering a story when it feels like you don't have any substantial control over the story in some ways? And actually, one of the things I think does work about Mask, you sort of gestured to this, the stakes don't feel too high in any given in any given branch of that story necessarily. Things can go very badly wrong or very well, but most times it's just interesting. It feels more like playing with causality. Whereas
it's the thing of it's only 15 minutes long, and so there's very little cost to doing a playthrough of Mask where you fuck everything up and end up in prison and divorced. Whereas if it's an episodic thing, there's this kind of, there's a good kind of tension maybe, but also I think there's an anxiety of, did I fuck that up? Is that going to come back to bite me in a way I don't like 2 episodes from now? Like, you get that when you're watching TV shows of, like, I just watched the French drama The Returned, and it's brilliant, but it's a genre fiction, and it's always teetering on the edge of just going to shit, because it's so easy to fuck that stuff up, and it can so easily go too far into the supernatural and become what Lost become, or Heroes became,
Have
or
you finished the first series?
Yes, I've just finished it, and I really liked it all the way through. Marsh's
done his "your television opinion is wrong" face.
No. We'll have another discussion later. But I'm interested to know because it is all the way through teetering on that edge, and I think the final episode doesn't exactly pull it back from the edge. Like, it's kind of bungeed over it. Maybe the second series, if there will be one, will...
There is. It's starting next month. But I don't mind the last episode of the thing bungeeing over the edge, because at that point, it's like, well, the writers tying themselves in a straitjacket, and 3 years later I want to see how they get out of it, or if they can get out of it. But you get that thing where you're putting a lot of faith in the writer, and that turns into a weird kind of anxiety in those games like Life is Strange, when you're essentially the writer. When you've made a decision that you're like, well, I hope I don't fuck that up in a way that the television show I'm enjoying goes to shit in 3 episodes' time because of it. Because then I've wasted this time I've invested in this thing.
Something that I was thinking about is soap operas, and that's possibly because I just spend a lot of time thinking about Holby City at the moment and Casualty. But I was having a sort of slightly wine-based conversation with my friend Ed, and we were sort of talking about how it would be awesome if games could figure out a way to do a soap opera style thing. And one of the things that I was thinking when I was playing the interactive Casualty episode was that maybe it would be good if you had the bedrock of the plot, you know, what happens interpersonally with the doctors or whoever, you know, your cast of main characters. But each episode you could actually just play through the dramas of the people who come into A&E sort of differently, and sort of have that play out in sort of wildly different ways. But it wouldn't necessarily upset the core dynamics. It would just be, you know, like there was a thing on, I think it was Casualty, it might have been Holby. The timeline sort of blurs for me because I binge watch. But there was one where... Shut up. There was one where there was this little boy who, or, you know, sort of teenage boy, and he didn't like his dad's new fiance because she was kind of like his age and he missed his mum and all that stuff. So instead of like dealing with this like, you know, grown-ups or a nearly grown-up and an actual adult, he hides a snake in her drawer and then I think pretends that he's put her engagement ring in it, and then she goes to get it out and they have like a bit of an altercation and she gets bitten by the snake. It's his snake. He's got snakes. But he didn't know that it was poisonous.
Well, he's got snakes.
And he didn't know that it was poisonous, and so she gets bit, and then they all end up in the hospital, and, you know, all of that stuff. But, like, I was thinking that rather than it affecting the staff of the hospital, you could just have it play out, and sort of you would affect the relationship of this family who will, like, ultimately just go home afterwards, you know? Or, like, you know, you'd try and figure out either whether, you know, you wanted the dad to, like, try and sort everything out, or whether the fiancé would, like, leave him because of his snake son, or, like, you know, all of this kind of stuff.
It's the difference between serialized drama and episodic drama, and I think procedural stuff probably works much better for this kind of game. I spoke a few episodes back about Black Closet, is that his name?
Yeah.
Which is the high school girl detective agency anime lesbians show. Which is basically each story or each week of the story is you're solving or trying to prevent a scandal from happening. But then on the weekends, you make decisions about how you're going to treat the other kind of staff or the people, they're called minions. They're your fellow classmates,
This is
basically.
Gossip Girl, Graham.
Yeah, it is. It's Gossip Girl. But it works. It's like you've got the kind of ongoing narrative of your fellow classmates who are the same each week, but then the actual decisions you're making are mainly to do with these characters that just come in like in an episode of CSI because, you know, they've committed a crime and, you know, you got to deal with them.
That's the BioWare structure though, right? Like in a different form. You have your circle of companions that you deal with in a kind of ongoing way, and you dip into quests where you'll meet a cast of characters that are specific to that quest and you resolve it one way or another. Like, this, you know, actually most effective choice-based games do seem to have that sort of distinction in one form or another. Maybe the reason that I get frustrated with games like Life is Strange is because it's rigidly linear and it really wants you to care about the lives of specific characters who, if they're gone, are gone. And so, you know, a lot of characters can impact the story in some ways, but can't be allowed to impact it too much. And there's that constant trade-off between how variable somebody's fate can be versus how important they can be to the story. So there's you know, if somebody's fate can change massively, they probably can't be of much central importance to what actually happens in the plot, which is the most unsatisfying arrangement of those elements possible. Because if somebody's fate can be massively changed, you want that to have a huge knock-on effect on what can happen in the story. If it doesn't matter that you can say, you know, if someone has a huge impact on the story, but you can barely affect whether they like you-ish or not, then it's less satisfying. So it feels like those games by design are locked into the least satisfying arrangement of character and action.
But that's why I think you've got to gamify it more in the way that Black Closet does. Like, say if you were making a Star Trek equivalent of this, yes, Spock, Bones, and Kirk aren't going to die, but you could introduce red shirts each episode that, through your decisions, might die or might live. And because they're just red shirts, maybe they don't matter so much, but you treat them as a resource. You have some sort of metric where the crew's opinion of you goes down and they're more likely to mutiny against you, or less likely to have sex with you if you're Kirk, because you keep getting the red shirts killed because you're not, you know, a good enough space captain. Again, that is probably how Mass Effect works, isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah.
Isn't it what you're saying about, you know, there being these sort of dramatic changes that would be occurring to the main characters and stuff? For me, I also just really like spending time with them, so I'm actually less bothered by the variation that they could experience, because in some ways, or in a lot of ways, Life is Strange feels like the first time somebody has made a game with me in mind, like my experiences of life. And
with your time travel powers.
With my time travel powers. But with some of the conversations that the girls have with each other, or some of the, like, the tiny nuances of their relationships, or, you know, things like that. Like, that's probably the first time I've seen that represented in a game. And that was, you know, so I've actually just really enjoyed sort of spending time with them, and in some ways I don't mind that I have less control over that, or I can't affect it too much one way or the other.
It's more that I think beyond a certain point, like, I agree with you. I think Life is Strange has some really good conversations, and actually some notably bad ones. Which is actually a maybe point to come back to, but there's a sort of, a lot of these games rely on forced fail sequences, which are things that we would feel really shitty about in almost any other kind of game, to prompt drama. And so your attachment to those characters has to be sort of mitigated a bit by the fact that nothing you really choose ultimately matters very much when it comes to somebody who's that important. So you get to experience conversations that you might not otherwise in a game between two very well-realized characters. But because they're well-realized, any failure or hardship they experience will probably be taken out of your hands, because the game needs to kind of preserve, its variables in those particular cases. And that, for me, I think over the course of a long season, as the stakes of failure get higher and the amount of choices you make increase, that for me makes me stop caring so much about what I do, because I understand at that point that, well, if anything truly bad happens to these characters, it's not going to matter what I did. Or it'll matter vaguely.
Yeah, I think the worst thing that happens to your characters in the last episode is completely a choice that you could have made had you been in control of your character at that point.
Yeah.
But that control is taken away. They make terrible decisions, bad things happen. You're like, well...
Yeah, the strategic stripping of control is something that, happens by design, basically.
Although it's giving you some semblance of choice, it seems like the pleasure of these games is supposed to be the story and the characters. So do you find them more or less satisfying for that semblance of choice than, for example, something like Gone Home, which is allowing you to similarly explore a story, but that story is conveyed via geometry or architecture rather than...
I think the reason Gone Home works is because its vocabulary is very simple. And I think, actually, to boil it down, the reason I'm starting to have a problem with these games is because their vocabulary is all over the fucking place, and it's not consistent. And so
it breaks its own rules throughout that series.
And not just in the kind of in-universe rules like the time travel stuff, as in whether or not you're rewarded or punished for taking time in an environment is something that varies. Whether or not a character would care or not that you are literally rummaging through their drawers and looking at their laptop right in front of them varies. If there's a particular...
It's weird because you were far more comfy doing that, whereas I was just sat there kind of appalled that you were even going in some of the rooms.
It's not comfy. It's that early on the game says, A, I will reward you for being thorough if you explore, and B, no character will give a shit if you're literally in front of them checking their emails. And when it teaches you those two things, and it holds you to account in that, and those things may prove to be useful, but you have these big climactic conversations where deeds you've done one way or another are tallied basically to determine the outcome of a later event. The vocabulary of the game is do as much as you can in every single environment, and most of the time that's fine. The game is quite nice.
I still didn't do that, and I didn't feel because I felt like the character pressure was more that I wanted to stay in character, and I felt like the game kind of rewarded that, but, maybe on a...
Possibly, but, it literally rewards you in measurable, you did well ways for being thorough. And, it treats you like you missed something if you just didn't choose to, seek it out. Literally at the end when you get your summary of what you did versus what your friends did. There are things I didn't do because it didn't occur to me to do them that are kind of, totted up. So it might not have been in character to kind of game some things in that way, but...
It's such a traditional problem with point-and-click adventures. Modern game design is that you establish a bunch of rules, and then over the course of the game, those rules provide challenges that repeat and iterate and change very slightly, but the fundamental rules remain the same, whereas adventure games were able to be more expressive and tell broader stories, because many of the challenges that you encountered as you went along were bespoke in some way, and so they didn't have necessarily fixed rules, and they would often contradict themselves in ways that were frustrating. And even something modern like Broken Age does that. It teaches you that falling through the clouds is bad, but then to solve one of the puzzles you have to fall through a cloud in a particular place, and that kind of thing, and that's incredibly frustrating. But it sounds like some of the cracks in Life is Strange are maybe papered over if you empathise more with the main character, not to say you're deliberately not empathising with them or anything like that, but if you're just drawn into that part of it, then you fall into step with the game maybe more.
I think, I think that's it. I think I really was drawn in at the start, and because I don't think it's totally subjective. I do think it objectively gets a bit overlong and makes some big missteps in that sort of penultimate episode, where it actually makes it harder to engage with, because
episode 4 should have been 2 episodes, and it should have been paced and structured very differently, I think.
And it starts to do things that feel a bit like, it's actually really good to answer that, should you explore the environments thing earlier on, the way it's structured, it's balanced really meticulously, so you never feel particular time pressure, partly because you can literally time travel. So you can sort of feel like you can spend a bit more time in environments and play that way, and it even makes, points about your character being nosy, which kind of validates you having that more investigative style. Whereas later on you'll be asked, like, a character will literally be like, so thirsty they're desperately uncomfortable, and say, can you get me a drink? At which point you also have an opportunity to explore the entire room and comment languish at length about every single object in that room. But it's very hard to do that and maintain the integrity of the fiction, even with time travel powers, because either way you're being a bit of a prick, really. Which is a problem it has. But it's just a question, I think it's because when you're going to make a game that doesn't adhere to any rules in how it regards the player and what it allows the player to influence and not, you have to balance it so carefully, and you just cannot let up the slack, or you can't start to slack on, like, how much, benefit the doubt you expect from the player in a given moment, or the definite moments of, like, well, if that was a choice that you'd given me, I could have chosen something different, but arbitrarily you decided to make this one something the character just does, or so on.
It certainly feels like 4 trades on the goodwill that 1 to 3 have built up. Like, to sort of, you have to trust that it's going somewhere, and it's up to 5 to actually sort of pay off on that front, and, but yeah, so I'm just a bit kind of, I guess, waiting for the other shoe to drop in some ways, but yeah.
I don't think I would have started thinking this negatively about it had I not played Until Dawn, which is so bad because nothing you do in that game has any meaningful relationship with anything else. It's actually the extreme of sloppiness in this design, right? It actually has characters lecture you more loudly about cause and effect and the butterfly effect in order to mask the fact that it's far more meaningless and incredibly arbitrary with how it apportions meaning, and yet more grandiose in pointing out, well, this has happened because of this. And as a result, it kind of exposes that the entire thing, as you said at the start, is just a pachinko machine where you can either keep happily plugging away, and Life is Strange gets away with it because actually the atmosphere is lovely and the characters are brilliant and all that stuff. Whereas I think Until Dawn for me exposed that, man, if you strip away the likability, the sense of impact of your own actions, and the plot, these are like the worst video games.
Yeah.
What have you been playing, Grable?
I've been playing a game that also has interesting choice and narrative in it. I've been playing 80 Days.
That is really good.
Which has just come out on PC today, and it's fucking brilliant. I played it the once through on iPad, and for listeners who don't know, this is a game inspired by Around the World in 80 Days, Jules Verne's novel, but it's not slavish in terms of its interpretation of it. Around the World in 80 Days is one of the few Jules Verne novels that's not science fiction. It's set in what was then the present day, and it's inspired by the technological revolutions that were happening in the time, with stuff like the Indian railways being linked up and the formation of the first transcontinental railway, and that spawning this idea that you could now go around the world using these great steam train machines. And then it's a quite boyish, spirited adventure novel. And although it was written a long time ago, I think the ways in which the game modernizes that stuff works perfectly, because it introduces sci-fi concepts in order to give you that sense again of being on the verge of a technological revolution. I think it might have been difficult for modern audiences to say, wow, steam trains. But instead what it does is it introduces airships, and it introduces an artificers guild that make mechs, and you go to all of the same places, and it's set in the same time period, and it's still making references to the Franco-Prussian War, and it's still these kind of countries you're going through that on the verge of political revolutions and all this kind of stuff. But it introduces these modern concepts of technology, and then it introduces modern ideas of social revolution as well. It's perhaps the most overt feminist game I can think of, and I've been playing it today, and every single character I meet is a woman, and everyone is a capable mathematician or an engineer. She's building robots. She's traveling across the world in order to learn things for her city and stuff like that. And you play not as Phileas Fogg, the lion in a top hat from the cartoon, because that's predominantly.
Think of himself as anything else.
You play as is it Passepartout? Is that
Passepartout.
Passepartout. You play as Passepartout, and it's got a really interesting approach to choice, because it's essentially a choose your own adventure. You choose which direction you're going to travel, how you're going to get there, whether you're going to travel by train or boat or airship, depending on the options available to you. And then along the way you get little snippets of narrative of the people that you meet on the train, the air pirates that pick up your carriage as you're driving towards Helsinki, that kind of thing. And then you make these little choices, but the choices don't come in fixed positions. It's not like an event happens and then you choose how you react to it, or it's not only that. Sometimes you get to choose what happens in response to an action that your character has performed that you didn't choose. Sometimes you get to choose what happens in response to an action that you did choose. And so you're controlling kind of both sides in the narrative in a way which is really uncommon for games. And I particularly like the choice because a lot of the time you're not choosing what happens or how you act in response to it. Sometimes you're just choosing how to react to it. You're choosing what kind of Passepartout you are. And sometimes it's just as simple as being it's a game about being a nice person. It's about being graceful in the face of adversity. It's about choosing to be the open-minded person. So one of the people I met today she was studying algebra, and it's explained that you're surprised when you see her reading these algebra books because she is from a place which is known for its essentially barbarism. It's a country which is historically invaded its neighbours, being concerned with war and expanding its borders and so forth. And at every point during this conversation, you have the choice of saying something which is a little bit judgmental, which is just acknowledging that past and, framing her desire for knowledge in algebra as still being a desire to expand the borders of her country and that kind of stuff. But you can choose not to. You can choose to be the nice person. You can choose to be the kind of graceful French gentleman. And I can't think, it's a game about manners, and I can't think of any other game where the power fantasy is essentially of just, I'm just going to be the nicest, calmest person in all these different situations. Well, Fogg, who is a brilliant character in himself, and depending on what areas of the world you go into, he gets into some scrapes, and you can't define his character like he's a kind of stoic English gentleman, of course, but he's not only that. He will surprise you as you go along the way, but he will be more affected by the cold, and he is a little kind of relationship meter, or his comfort meter, which you can put up by shaving him and folding his clothes nicely and stuff like that.
Don't you? Yeah. Around the world.
Or play cards with him to keep him entertained. But he'll get upset by the sand in his clothes and the cold outside and the miserable view and stuff like that. And it feels great to be the person that doesn't care about that stuff, that rises above these situations. So I really like that for it.
What kind of valet were you for the most part, would you say? Because, I kept finding myself, just staging tiny rebellions, or maybe leaving him ever so slightly too long before I waxed his moustache, or, all of that kind of stuff.
See, I kind of pride myself in looking after him well, but my first go-through, I was also quite, I think it describes you as zestful. I was quite a zestful Passepartout. So, when we were sailing across the Atlantic Ocean, I think, towards home, and you can get boarded by pirates that take control of the ship and start steering you towards some other island, and you can lead a mutiny and that sort of stuff. So I was the person who got involved and solved those situations, and that felt great. And I had a gay tryst in New Orleans. That's really cool.
I did that as well, and it was just so sweet.
I know.
And he was just I remembered him forever. It was just aww.
But in the playthrough I'm going through at the moment, I am playing it more reserved, so I'm getting involved less in the adventures and avoiding Fogg's gaze when he wants me to resolve certain situations. And it's interesting the way the consequences play out in that, because sometimes it's not a bad thing happens in the story. Sometimes it's just you read in the paper 2 days later that the man that you saw being talked to by the police has been killed because he was turned out to be a traitor and he was smuggling something. And, you kind of had this thing of what we were just talking about, of the anxiety of consequence. This game has consequences, but the consequences don't impact the central drama or mechanic or challenge of it in such a way. You just you get a little news headline that tells you what the consequence was of your actions. And if I had helped that person, maybe I would have got a reward that I could have then sold at a different town further in the line, and that would have helped me on my journey and sped it up. Or maybe he would have just had a conversation with him, and the conversation's the writing, and it's all really lovely. And maybe that would have unlocked or revealed on the map a different route between cities that could have sped up my journey. And I really like that about it as well. Those two mechanics are really good for, although it's a kind of choose your own adventure where you can go anywhere in the world at any time, it does a good job of giving you little sub-goals of, like, because the routes that you're discovering aren't the routes that are necessarily directly next to where you currently are. Sometimes you'll find a route halfway around the world, and it will just plant that little seed in your head of, well, I'm going to aim for San Francisco now then, because now I know that there's this route between San Francisco and Atlanta. Or you get the bottle of wine that says, you can buy this for £30, but you can sell it for £2,300 if you can get to Berlin.
So it does still have the suitcase thing from the iPad edition.
Everything from the iPad edition is there, along with the 2 expansions. Were they free updates? Because they added the Arctic storylines, and they added storylines in the Americas.
Pole?
I haven't. No, I haven't been to the North Pole.
Go to the North Pole.
So they added a bunch of stuff there, and I think there's like tens of thousands of more stuff they've added specifically for the PC release as well.
Yeah.
It runs great, and it looks great, and it feels great. It's ported really well.
I remember when I first had the press release for the iPad version, or the iOS version, or whatever it was, and one of the sort of things that the press release was championing, and I remember being quite sort of, at the time, was about sort of how many different narrative sort of options there were. I think it said something, it was something like, it's got 80,000, choices that you can make, and I was kind of like, it's kind of meaningless. I don't know how to judge that as a metric, as a sort of a way of evaluating a game.
Oh, that's crappy game marketing. I think it was Portal,
like that.
Portal 2, someone asked Valve how many lines of dialogue were in it, and it's like 120,000 lines of dialogue. Wow! Can't wait to play that game.
But yeah, but the game itself is so much more than that, and it's so complicated, and the bits interlock so beautifully. And you're right about the choices, or even just sort of the way that you choose to play Passepartout. He ends up sort of, it's like you say, you don't sort of ever play it right or wrong. It's more that you just sort of get different each time, and that's really cool. And when you get round to the end of a circuit of the world, I think it asks if you want to go again, basically, and you sort of, even if you play similarly, I did find myself just sort of with the urge to explore, and just sort of, it wasn't a case of slavishly like retracing my steps and then choosing a different branch each time and mining it out. It was very much like, I'm just going on a new adventure. I wonder what's going to happen.
It does feel like an adventure, unlike tourism in a way that other games don't. Like, there's lots of games which you hit kind of exotic locations all over the world, like the Uncharted series and stuff like that. But this is a game about actually travelling between those different locations, and that makes such a difference. The feeling that you're constantly in motion, and the things that happen to you, the set pieces, even if they're action set pieces, happen on the road.
Meg's writing is so good as well. It's so evocative. It properly sort of transports you to those places, I'd say, because I was playing it a year or so ago, and it was at Christmas, and I'd basically made a little Christmas nest where I just sort of hide under a skylight where there's like a tiny bit in the attic, and just put put the duvet in, like a bottle of whiskey, and then some...
Take that, Oliver Cromwell!
Exactly, he would hate it. But yeah, so I was just kind of like properly curled up, and it was, like a window into all of these different places. It was very much like the sort of the magic of Christmas. It's so weird, but because I used to watch the Chronicles of Narnia at Christmas time, and it was that same kind of magical worlds kind of thing that I used to get from all of that. Stop laughing at me. But yeah, it was that kind of thing. It was really good.
I think you're right. The reason it's so elegant is it's a combination of manners and travel. It's the notion that you don't really expect that any of your encounters with people will be anything but brief, which is partly like a manners of the time thing, which is like, wow, we've had such incredible experiences on this train. Goodbye forever. Literally never speaking to you or thinking about you ever again. Farewell. It actually works because everything becomes naturally episodic, and you don't have that kind of baggage of decisions piling up. Everything is this little vignette of a place and a time, and maybe you come out of it with this kind of like slightly bittersweet, oh, what if we could have stayed thing. But that's completely in keeping with the tone of the thing, and you never feel kind of betrayed that the game has moved you on, because you have a much clearer objective, a really obvious objective, which is to get back to London. So you always have to be leaving. So it's kind of perfect in that way.
It's a beautiful mixture of romance and sentimentality. It's the romance of the traveller. And I really like, as well, like the thing you said, Pip, of you don't ever feel like you're playing it right or wrong. It's really good at providing a different criteria by which to judge you, because you're trying to move as quickly as possible. You're trying to maybe win the favour or get information from each of the people you meet along the way. You can be the kind of perfectly upright, noble, adventurer, heroic, romantic lead that everyone loves, but then you'll go back to Fogg and he'll just kind of bristle his moustache a little bit because he doesn't approve of how
or
you're an extravagant sort.
Suit or something,
I love playing it as the kind of quite good butler who's quite practical and always has the right coat available, but is like a complete source between, like, whenever you get into a city and you have the option to go and explore at night.
You went a wooing.
I did go.
I
got knocked out in a pantry and locked in a pantry. Well, it was heavily implied that Fogg had a threesome with two women that I was trying to...
This is what I was thinking of when I was saying that Fogg was the prize. Stroking the shit out of everybody.
I'm still picturing I was in the line as well.
Yeah. But when I say a sauce, I don't really necessarily. I mean like, a kind of old sot, like as in just going off and getting hammered on like fruit liqueur and always having a hangover, but like ushering us to the train station the next morning because we've got to get to Calcutta or something. It's fucking brilliant. It is really, really, really extraordinarily good.
Yeah. Aw, I'm so glad it's come to PC as well, because now we can just talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
Pip.
Ease.
What have you been playing?
Panoramical, innit?
What is that?
So it's a project by one of the people involved in Proteus, not Ed Key. Is it David Kanaga? I don't know. And another guy. And what it is you, as far as I've experienced of it, because I didn't actually have that much time to play with it yet, but it sort of deposits you into these pre-existing soundscapes, and what you can do is you can alter 9 different variables, and what that does is it changes what's going on the screen as well as the sounds that are being made. And so you basically create different environments and corresponding sounds or songs or something, and so it's very much geared around creating experiences that you're happy with, I think, or at least that's how I played it. And so
right, so it's not like there's no kind of test element to it. You're not being tested against
not
anything.
As far as I could tell. There was an odd thing where not all of the stuff is available to you at the start, and so you have to experience each one to unlock the next one around on this sort of circle wheel of selection that you have at the start. And I can't work out whether I'd broken it, because the final one made me feel incredibly sick. It was like a proper kind of kaleidoscopic effect. But the thing that you're supposed to be able to do, which is when you're playing mouse and keyboard, press space for long enough and it sort of takes you back to that main menu, it transitions you back. It didn't work, and I was just sort of stuck in there forever, just sort of changing colours and changing sort of basic geometry.
You must
and
stay in
just
your puke hole.
getting more and more sick feeling. So I don't know if that was me breaking it, or whether the game suddenly just closes in around you and wants you to stay forever. I don't know.
You like this
I had to...
Nordic ice float aurora borealis? Well, you'll love the puke zone.
I had to actually quit out of that. That one actually reminded me of a kind of Eurodance experimental album interactive game experience thing that was basically
the
like
Venga Boys
hey,
CD-ROM experience.
You're in Ibiza now. Experience a sort of kaleidoscope mashed up with a sort of a house and some palm trees. It was all a bit odd. But yeah, so some of the earlier ones are a bit more figurative. So you'd have you'd change one of the variables and it would alter the sounds, but also you would end up with maybe some icebergs or things that looked like icebergs floating on a sort of a darker area that your brain would sort of go, oh, that's probably the sea, and then you'd change another thing and some shoots would appear that were probably, trees or, and so you could actually create I really like the sort of the desolate stuff that would be accompanied by a slightly more sparse soundscape, because the other thing is you don't have a choice in how they interlink. So sometimes if you create something that you're happy with visually, it might be that the variables you've had to change are quite overwhelming aurally. And so you're kind of sat there like, I don't think I can actually stay in this space for long, even though aesthetically I'd like to. So it's kind of it's an odd one, and I'd like to spend a bit more time playing with it. But in terms of things that I find relaxing and more enjoyable to actually sort of disappear into my own head with, I've been playing around with the colour palettes of Proteus, and that's kind of a bit more entertaining.
Is that something you have to kind of hack in somewhere? Is it? It's not available in the main game, is it?
Somewhere in the game files you can find the PNG file for the colour palette, and what I was doing was just messing around with that in Photoshop and sort of putting it back into the game, and which is how I ended up with this beautiful sort of autumnal thing, and then suddenly blue chickens because I'd managed to change that variable and didn't know what I was doing. But that's far more kind of, I've changed a few things and I'm going to go into it and have the actual experience for a while, because I think maybe I get a bit overwhelmed with the sound from Panoramical, but yeah, I'm glad it exists, and I'm glad that I've played around with it. But the other thing that's quite difficult with it is that there doesn't seem to be a way of sharing so much. Obviously you could stream it, and there's an inbuilt way to share screenshots, easily to Twitter rather than just using the Steam keys. But
how wildly different are people's music that they produce in that game going to be from each other anyway?
I don't know, well, because you've got 9 different variables, and they're all sort of, so you hold the key down and then you move the mouse, around a sort of a square shape, and so it's, it's anywhere within that shape is the sound that you're making on that variable. So, there's going to be millions and millions of different exact combinations. But
are they all going to sound similar-ish, or are they going to? Is one song going to sound completely different from somebody else's?
Well, they're not fixed points either. So if you want to sort of change things up, you'd just sort of be fiddling around with the different keys and the different variables and stuff. So, I think one of the things that they've said that they are either going to do or they have done with a version of it is you can use it as actual sort of DJing software, or
right. I was going to wonder about that.
Plug it into that. But,
so I do quite like those sort of music visualization tools. Do you ever play Electroplankton on the DS?
I did. I really loved that, actually.
This seems like it's kind of successor to that sort of thing where you're playing around and making music, basically.
I've got it in the other room. You could go check it out later.
Ah.
But yeah.
Classic game.
So good, but in terms of chilling out, I still adore Proteus. So.
Shall we do questions from questions?
Yes! Aaron writes, Dear Crates and Crowbars, I'm in my 3rd season in the Premier League and my team, Brighton, is pushing for a place in Europe. It's 2/3 of the way through the season, and I'm playing Aston Villa down in 13th spot. Brighton boss the first half, creating numerous opportunities and eventually scoring, but we pick up a couple of yellow cards.
What the fuck is this? Is this Dota?
It's the Seagulls. Good old Sussex by the sea.
I don't think much of it. I'm sure this is going somewhere. We keep crying.
Possibly.
I don't think much of it, as it can happen in most games, and apart from a couple of players I've set to be tackled hard, my team is under no instructions to play super physically. The second half, everything falls apart, and the game ends 2-1 to Villa, with me down to 10 men. I look through the stats and see that my team received 7 yellow cards and a red, while the opposition only received 1 yellow. I'm incensed and reload the game. That's bollocks, I utter to myself. 7 yellows in one game? That's ridiculous. But now having reloaded, I'm racked by guilt. Have I just cheated? Is my season sullied by this act? And if I finish in 7th spot, will it all be down to this game and my cheating? I try to justify it by telling myself that I reload other games when I'm not doing well. My first playthrough of XCOM resulted in several reloads to save a favourite character. Medieval Total War was often reloaded to save a key region from being overthrown, and I don't think twice about reloading in stealth or action games, so why does it feel so wrong to reload here? My question then is, when is it wrong to reload a game? Is it ever wrong? Are there certain games or genres that should not be reloaded? Or is everything up for a reload? And have you ever felt guilty about a reload? Thanks for the great pod. Right. Possibly a typo, possibly a pun. Aaron.
Ain't no cheating but cheating yourself. I have thought about this a great deal when it comes to Football Manager, because
You've written about it, haven't you?
I wrote an article about it. In fact, I think I talked about it on the pod at the time as well, because sometimes I play Football Manager and I take whatever happens as canon and stick with it and deal with the consequences, and sometimes when I play Football Manager I cheat. I save before important matches, and if I lose them I reload until I win, because I'm more concerned with telling myself the story that I want to hear more than actually dealing with the tactical systems that are underpinning it. And both can be satisfying. Both are satisfying in different ways, particularly in Football Manager, where, you know, we just talked about pachinko machines. Nothing feels quite so much like a emotional pachinko machine than Football Manager, where you are making tactical decisions and there is a simulation that underpins everything, but it's such a complex system, it's really hard to discern cause and effect between your decision making and the outcomes.
Is it Football Manager he's talking about?
Presumably, or he's actually the boss of
Manager of Brighton.
and he has time powers.
He might have been playing FIFA or something, or one of these other football games.
I think it sounds like Football Manager to me.
Yeah, if he's telling his team to tackle hard and stuff like that,
right,
that would be a Football Manager decision, because
okay,
I give that order to my men, my troops in the Football Manager.
Is it different to, like, being a supporter of a terrible team? Like, for me, having not played Football Manager, but always sort of quite liking the idea in abstract, the idea of reloading seems to go against the feeling that your team can just have a really shit season and you're stuck supporting them even though they're awful and it's miserable, and you go week after week and there they are. There it goes. Bye-bye cup. Hello relegation.
I think it came up on the last episode that I was a Manchester United supporter, and so Rich Stanton called me a glory hunter.
Yeah.
Which
is
that's so more or less
primary school.
Well, Rich Stanton and I went to the same primary school, so and so that's, yeah, there's different pleasures to supporting football, and it's the same with Football Manager. Sometimes you want to support the winning team and you want the excitement of a World Cup, a Champions League, that kind of thing, but there is a very different kind of pleasure to doing it on a rainy Sunday morning in Watford, as the saying goes.
Do you have different tiers of team that you support? Because I had a few friends who had like a Premiership team. You know, growing up, there was a Premiership team that they allied to, but they would also keep proper tabs on a local team that were maybe a few divisions down.
I don't, in part because there is no real local team in Bath. The kind of closest is Bristol, but I don't have any connection to or affection for Bristol as a city. It was a little bit more when I was living in Scotland, because you had Hamilton Academicals, who were just down the road, and they were in like Division 2 or something like that, but now they're actually in the top division in Scotland, which is weird. The strange things that happen when Rangers get relegated to the bottom division. But I know a lot of people who do that. For me, like, I used to support Manchester United properly in the 90s when I was a kid. And
this is why all of our conversations end up with me saying, what's happened to Karol Poborski? What's he up to now?
I looked it up after you said that. He's cut off his hair.
Yeah.
Looks much better.
What the fuck is this podcast?
I think it's Dota.
Whereas today I don't, like, I sort of have that lingering affection for Manchester United, and I actually like them more now that they're losing, but I tend to pick sides in particular matches. So, like, I'll root for whoever the underdog is in a match, and if the underdog starts to win,
for sure.
I will start supporting the other team midway through the match, because I'm more interested in the drama of it, or the storytelling aspects of it. And it's, again, I guess the same thing with something like Football Manager, where and other games to a certain extent, especially something like XCOM, where sometimes I'm just more interested in the story that I'm telling myself, more than the actual result of winning or losing. So, you know, I don't think anyone should feel guilty about cheating in a video game, but if
it's only wrong if it feels bad to you.
Yeah, and if it is to him, then don't do it again.
I suppose, if what you're getting out of the experience is, I'm doing, the underdog story for myself, then if you suddenly graft on time powers to the underdog, then they're the cosmic overdog will result.
Sometimes, but sometimes you want to tell yourself the story of the underdog triumphing, and so
but
if then the kind of dice roll goes no, anytime we played Numenera, it's really hard to say I'm going to be this kind of character. Roll a dice, it comes up 1, and you fall over again. Accidentally shoot your friend and knock her off a castle wall.
Yeah, you did do that. Yeah, you did do that. That was
it was like, at that
wasn't
point,
my friend, Graham.
At that point, there's two choices. You can roll with the punches, which is one kind of pleasure, or you can rewind time and cheat, which is a different kind of pleasure. Like if you
do have that option in Numenera as well, don't you? With the you can spend XP to
reroll. You just have to value your goat friend enough to not sonic boom punch her off a roof.
She lived.
She did,
more or less. Just let that be canon.
Yeah, immediately retired.
Yeah, we didn't go and rescue her. We just left her there until the end of the battle.
I did eventually. I ran over and jumped off.
Because Graham did spend the rest of that fight teetering on the edge of a rooftop, feeling guilty, and trying to determine whether it was worth climbing down or if he should return to the desperate fight that his friends were engaged in.
My D&D had a moment like that. There was, because my character's supposed to be good with bows, but I don't have a bow, so I did this thing where I was like, can I use my friend's bow? Like, because we were both on a bridge next to each other, and it was like, yeah, alright, why not? But I rolled a critical fail, and so it was basically like, I took his bow, fired it somewhere completely nonsensical, looked a bit guilty and was like, your bow's broken, and I handed it back, and it was just, I don't know, that stuff's more satisfying, but that's because you build it into a narrative that you're all experiencing together, whereas if this is just something and if you've got an idea in mind, or maybe if the thing that you'd been doing, which was letting it play out, isn't fun anymore, then you're just like, what's keeping me in this miserable cycle of always losing? Like, what's the payoff, I guess?
The story that it tells via failure has to be more interesting than the one you're going to tell via victory, basically.
Or at least as interesting, or personally rewarding.
Echoes writes, Dear X and Y, playing Homeworld Remastered shot me back 17 years in an instant. The updated graphics made it look how I remembered, but a single pleasing piece of game design echoed across the years. After capturing enemy spaceships in a mission, if they survive, then the whole fleet line up for the uber-cool hyperspace maneuver. My captured ships take position on the top left of my mothership, regardless of their class and rank, not mixing in with my own ships of the same class. I vividly remember how right that felt 17 years ago. They're the ragtag bits and bobs that I managed to nick and are not welcome in my line of battle. Then, today, I noticed the same thing. It shot me back to the age of 20 faster and more completely than any smell or song or photo. Do games, by being a collection of interactions, physical and mental, burn deeper into people's grey matter than passive media? Have you had something similar happen to you? Also, can you recommend a good Indian restaurant? Thanks for X and Y Echoes. I think I'm saying that right. Echoes.
Bombay Brasserie. It's probably the one of the better ones.
It's Bengal.
Bengal, sorry.
Brasserie.
Bengal Brasserie. And I quite like Jamuna as well.
And if you ever take out the masala kitchen, is all right.
Yeah.
Like curry mahal for takeout. But
How's it for vegetarians, Graham?
very good. And so is the Bengal Brasserie, actually. I drop in Millstone Street in Bath.
They look after you there.
Yeah, I've been there so many times that when I went there near Christmas, they gave me like leather-bound calendar notebook taking thing.
Oh.
Take that, Cromwell.
Yeah.
That's going to turn out to be an urban legend, and I'm just going to go, oh,
Yeah,
damn it.
You're thinking of Ebenezer Scrooge.
He didn't know what day Christmas was. Open that window. You boy, what day is this?
That's true,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
I shouldn't have questioned the Dickens knowledge of someone who's literally named after a Dickens character.
Yep, and I have watched The Muppet Christmas Carol God knows how many times.
To the man's point, of are games more capable of engendering reminiscence than other kind of media? I think they probably are. I mean, given just on the evidence of that, so much of gaming culture seems to be based on nostalgia. You know, Zach Gorman's cartoons about Zelda, Zelda looking stoic, and everybody's reading the cartoon probably weeping.
I don't know, we have like a long running conversation about how terrible my memory is when it comes to any form of media, and games aren't really any exception to that, I would say. There are things that I've played so much of that I remember them sort of verbatim, which is Ocarina of Time for me, actually. But that's sort of not particularly different from memorising for like the entire experience of Death Becomes Her through watching it so many times around the same age. So
I think I think it's actually slightly different in that there are definitely like films or songs and stuff that will be stuck in my head in their entirety forever. Whereas I find that games leave a very deep impression that I then forget until I'm reminded of them, which seems like a slightly different pattern of memory. And I think it's almost what he's talking about with the Homeworld analogy, where
It's more like muscle memory, maybe, than...
Yeah, or like spatial memory.
but you've told me entire sort of swathes of lore, just, because I was interested.
I remember useless fantasy information. That's a separate...
But that's but I'll ask you things that happened in your Mass Effect playthrough and stuff. I can't even remember what happened in Mass Effect, even though I played it and loved it. But you actually seem
maybe
to
there are
internalise
exceptions.
the story. And
But I think the example I would give would be like returning to... I remember a couple of years ago, but still then removed at a distance of 6 or 7 years from the game itself, like returning to Dark Age of Camelot, which is like my favourite MMO apart from Star Wars Galaxies, and knowing those places intimately but having sort of forgotten them. So it was like returning to a childhood street. Like, it was one of the most powerful senses of memory that I've had in association with any entertainment medium. But if you got me to like tell you, I don't know, what's the curvature of the road going from Cotswold Village to Pridwen Castle in that game, I couldn't have told you exactly. I could have maybe described the hills and stuff, but being back on that road, suddenly I remembered it exactly. And it took me being back there to kind of have that moment, but it would be like going back to Liverpool for me now and suddenly having that moment of like, shit, I know exactly how it all fits together, and I don't know, the feeling of having dredged something up from your memory rather than having had it always be there. I think games do stick in your memory, but I don't think they stick in quite the same way as other media.
Last week, the New York Review of Books published a review of a book by a guy called Michael Clune called Game Life, all one word, which is a memoir written through the prism of the video games he played in his youth. He picked 7 years from his childhood and pairs each one of them with 7 games. Well, pairs each one of them with 1 game. And writes about the experience of playing Elite alongside his first experience of death as a child and that kind of thing. And There's a bunch of people who've done similar things, like writing memoirs through the games they've played. It's quite an interesting idea, and I don't know if this book is any good, but the New York Review of Books liked it, and the article is dead good, and we'll put it in the show notes.
Cool. James writes, Dear Crowns and Canines, in recent weeks you seem to have been getting around your self-imposed Dota ban by instead talking about HOTS. And pretending, he stresses pretending, that it's a different game. That's made me wonder, what are your favourite games that break the rules? Whether mechanical, narrative, or ethical? And I'll make sure that's the end of the question. Thanks for written in... James.
Question singly designed to irritate at least 2 people in this podcast.
Well, I mean, I've maintained my silence on the topic of Defense of the Ancients 2, pretty much.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They're not the same game.
No.
James. I think, because, I mean, the answer to the game that breaks all the rules that I still like is Dota, so,
Seems like every majorly popular genre at the moment breaks the rules as we thought them to be 5 or 10 years ago. If you thought accessibility was a big deal, then then Minecraft and survival games,
or DayZ, or any of these games, yeah,
or Dota, or MOBAs, so forth and so on.
Yeah, I suppose this has been the era of contrary kind of designs rising up in...
Do you think that's just because the market has grown so large now that any kind of game can find a niche for itself that's profitable?
I think it's the right combination of technology, like Kickstarter and stuff being available, plus there being those kinds of, like, guess what, the metrics were wrong! Stories are attractive, like, they're attractive to press, they're attractive to communities of players. It makes a much better story than, guess what, everyone just wanted Assassin's Creed! Like, of all the, if you're going to believe in something about the people who play games, however you break that community down, then that's the more attractive story is the rule-breaking one, right? Like, it's actually everybody wanted Divinity Original Sin, not everybody wanted Dragon Age Inquisition, right?
It's also just, I think, systems of arcane knowledge feel good to people to learn, like Magic the Gathering or Pokemon, trading cards and so forth. These things have long been mega successful, and they're mega successful because people like learning stats and like learning about the 120 different Pokemon that you can catch. Similarly, football. There's lots of different football teams with lots of different football players, but people still like getting involved in fantasy football and digging into the stats. There's always going to be a market for the thing that seems overcomplicated. That doesn't mean, though, that accessibility doesn't also matter and that we shouldn't also be trying to lower the barriers at the same time. It's just, that's not the only way.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know, and you can watch a football match, you don't really need to understand anything about the different players to understand what's going on the pitch, more or less. Whereas something like Dota or even Minecraft, there's no way you can play Minecraft and get that crafting experience without knowing a lot of information up front.
No, but both things exist. Millions of people play fantasy football, is my point. And
Yeah.
You can't play that without not only having a strong knowledge of the rules of football, but also knowing all the...
I guess what I meant is that I was making the argument that maybe people get into that because there is an accessibility curve that allows them to slide into something more complicated, whereas I don't know that's the case with something like DayZ or certainly not Eve.
It probably just suggests that there's far more popular iterations of those ideas to come. The version that comes along that does both, that has that complexity and has the easier entry point equivalent to watching football on TV. There is an e-sport to be made, or a survival game to be made, or an MMO to be made, which will eclipse even Minecraft in popularity.
Good Lord.
Go do it, Mr. Email Man. James. Go do it, James. It's on you.
Don't talk about hops like that.
AC Godliman writes, imagine that you can add a game to the national curriculum, but it has to go into English Lit. So, which game? And why?
I was actually going to suggest 80 Days Around the World for that. Before knowing that you were going to talk about it.
That's the best
The one I was going to suggest when I decided that I was going to talk about it.
Yeah, no, the writing in that is the best writing in a video game, probably. I'd say, in terms of just the quality, like sentence to sentence
There's
quality
an
of the
actual
writing.
joy of language in
Yeah.
it, as well as a sort of a communicative
And
ability.
it's not wordy either. I mean, there's a lot of text games and visual novels where there's a kind of exhaustion of I wanted to play a game, but now I'm just reading a lot, which is a terrible thing. But
A lot of that stuff is also in a genre and quite schlocky, I find, in games in general, particularly in interactive fiction. Whereas that seems to be exactly appropriate and not too kind of showy or flamboyant or over the top. It's extremely restrained but evocative writing. I don't know, I was going to say Talos Principle, maybe? I don't think the quality of the writing is as good in that, but it is dealing with interesting ideas that would be fruitful to unpick in a...
It's beautiful to explore as well, and like the stuff that they added with the expansion, the Road to Gehenna stuff, is... I really love that. I possibly love that more than the original text.
It would be really nice to have a game for this that was literate, but wasn't just about writing. Not that, I mean, both Talos Principle and it's brilliantly designed games, but the reason you're including them there is not really because of the mechanics, it's because of the quality of the writing, or it'd be great if there was something that... Maybe Stanley Parable? Actually, like if you national curriculum, presumably secondary school, if you wanted to teach people about forms and how, structures can be...
Or the fourth wall, for example.
The fourth wall, how things can be broken apart. I think that'd be an interesting game to include. Because also it's funny as well, which is a kind of nice thing to kind of break apart from. Obviously, ATS can be funny, but it can also be tragic or romantic or...
Sexy.
Inappropriate.
Those are the four emotions.
a couple of years ago I interviewed Joel Levin, who's one of the creators of Minecraft Edu, which is the educational version of Minecraft, and he spoke about English lit using Minecraft to teach kids. I guess it was more primary school than secondary school age, but getting them to just say, play Minecraft for an hour and then diarise about it, and that being a really good way to reach kids who were otherwise uninterested in writing, use their excitement for the game and get them to tell stories about the stuff they
A whole
play.
generation of new games journalists born in an
Something
instant.
that I was thinking about and just didn't say yet because I thought it sounded too wanky, was maybe sort of having games that are more poetic or lyrical and just sort of having the structure of it, sort of be instead of maybe a poetry module or, sort of comparing it with traditional poetry, sort of having...
What, like Proteus, you
actual
mean?
beats
Something
of the story.
non-verbal?
Yeah, I am very much stuck on Proteus right now. I'm very sorry, but yeah, it's sort of it's cyclical in a way, and so I think that there's a certain amount that you could sort of analyse in terms of rhythm and
You could certainly compare it
metre.
to kind of nature poets, probably.
Yeah, and there's a certain amount of you could sort of properly analyse the choices that were made in sort of similar ways, I would say. So yeah, I'd be interested to have that included. Although I don't actually know what the government definition of English literature is, so I don't know whether it would
Depends on this. Well, it depends on. I don't know what the national curriculum definition of it is now, actually.
because we
Normally it
studied
depends.
a lot of like world poetry and sort of experimental stuff, and so yeah.
There's, we should mention Elegy for a Dead World, is that what it's called?
The poetry thing.
Yeah, which is literally just about visiting planets and then writing poetry about the things that you see while you're there. And that's it.
Yeah. I think maybe, there was that Jane Austen simulator as well, wasn't there? What's it called?
Yeah.
Coco, that's kind of the name of the dance.
Coco Banner.
Coco Banner! It's definitely not called that. I can't remember. Cotillion. I can remember. I can see you structuring, because that's, you make certain choices, you manipulate the AI and it automatically kind of writes a story, kind of Jane Austen style story of kind of calamity of manners and stuff. I can see you, letting people play that and then giving them writing tasks to kind of randomly generate a story that then they would write and then, use that as a way of analysing the way that Jane Austen uses language to kind of mock, to mimic it, essentially.
that's all the questions we have time for.
If you'd like to send us a question of your own, you can do so by emailing us to questions@crateandcrowbar.com, or by tweeting us @crateandcrowbar, or by leaving a question on our forum, which is crateandcrowbar.com/forum. If you would like no tangible benefit whatsoever, you can follow us on Patreon, patreon.com/crateandcrowbar.
That's follow us with money, right? Like, follow us around with money.
Yeah, follow us around with money for no tangible benefit. Although we have ordered microphones and pop shields and a strange box with twiddly knobs on
That's
it.
already arrived.
Yeah. We've got the pop shields as well. They're right in the next room. You can touch them next.
We could have avoided all these pops by putting them in front of our mouth.
We don't just hold them, though. We don't have any stands to attach them to yet.
But they are on their way. So, tangible benefits in some sense for us.
We could tange them.
Or you
Tange the
can
shit out of them.
Or you can tweet and follow us individually. I am @Gonnas, GONNAS.
I'm at Marsh Davis. It's DAVIES.
I'm at C Thurston, that's CTHURSTEN.
I'm at Pip Warr, which is PHILIPPAWARR.
Well done.
Stupid name.
Thanks, Dickens.
It's all his fault. All of it. Oh, what a jerk. If only my mother had had her way, I'd have been Hepzibah. And all of my problems would have been solved.
Fantastic.
It's a true fact.
Thanks for listening,
everybody.